Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. It's Daniel Estulin. Welcome to our internet, YouTube-based show in English called World at Large. I promised the other day to answer a question. Why is it that the Arabs hate Israel so much? So you see, for 1,500 years, Palestine was Arab. And if you look more broadly, the Canaanite and Semitic tribes and peoples whose descendants are considered the local Arabs lived there for many millennia. And so rulers and borders changed, but for the Arabs, these territories were considered the geographic center of their region or their caliphate, the intersection of trade, transportation routes. And so they consider this territory to be as much theirs as Europeans or European part of Russia to be belong to Russians. And so awareness of historical injustice and the understanding that at their own expense, Europeans paid for the crimes of the Third Reich are common to the entire Middle East. And considering political fragmentations, inequalities, poverty, and other socioeconomic problems, having a common enemy has become a very convenient, I'd say, an important element of the Arab/Islamic identity. And this agreement simplified the secular nature of the original state of Israel, created by liberal European Ashkenazi Jews outside the cultural space of their region. And so the Islamic countries could not openly confront the larger, powerful, and dominant West, but destroying this little Israel seemed easy enough. But the defeats in the 1967 and 1973 Arab-Israeli wars became even more painful and offensive to them. And so over several generations of propaganda, a chthonic, I'd say, image of evil was formed, covered in legends, myths, and facts. Fortunately, the non-selective policy of violence of the Jewish authorities against the Arab population contributed to this. And yes, Israel's strategic mistake was the refusal to completely evict the Palestinian Arabs after victories in wars based on the experience of Eastern European countries in relation to the Germans. As a result, this issue again will come up between now and the year 2030. So, can you reformat the Middle East? Well, you see, lacking the opportunity for their own subjective game, the struggle for primacy within the world of pan-regions. The Islamic world can solve various strategic problems, taking advantage of the window of opportunity due to the destruction of the global world and also the emergence of degrees of freedom. In other words, destroy opponents, weaken competition, seize vital space for further development. And so a glance at a modern political map will be enough to understand that no one causes as much annoyance and trouble as Israel. Of course, the latter destroys coherence, is located in the geographical center of the territory, controls one of the sanctuaries of Islam, and for several generations of its existence has become a unifying and principal enemy for the entire Islamic world. And so the vulnerable geographic, economic, military situation, together with a decrease in external support, complicates the survival of the Jewish state. And remember what Henry Kissinger said back in 2012. That Israel has a lifespan of about 10 years. And then an additional problem is caused by the fifth column. In other words, the number of Arab citizens exceeds 20% of the population. In total, there's about 9.5 million Jews or people in the country, not counting more than 5 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank. The numbers simply do not add up. And so after World War II, to prevent further conflict, for example, the Germans were expelled from the territories of Poland and Czechoslovakia. As history shows, this is a painful option, but in the long term, the most pragmatic, avoiding new wars and constant attempts to intervene to support the national minority. And so as soon as the losing neighboring power becomes stronger, issues of reunification, historical justice will be put on the agenda, especially if minority participation grows. And so the eviction of the Palestinian Arabs will be painful, but in the long term, it would reduce tension. Deprived of the possibility of returning, the Palestinians would gradually mix with the other Arab population. Let's not forget tribalism. And so this opportunity has been lost. And something like this is permissible immediately after victory, but not after several generations. And in the context of a weakening and also changing geopolitical paradigm in the world as a whole, and its main ally, needless to say, the United States of America. And so this period, 2025, 2026, 2027, in the context of this permanent series of crises and local disasters in the countries of the Middle East, there will be a general weakening of the control of nation states over their territories, a drop in living standards, radicalization. And we're seeing it right now, for example, not only in Syria, but the entire region. And if you think that Israel is a victor in this war in Syria, you're absolutely wrong. The level of well-being in Israel is decreasing dramatically, the standard of living. And so you have, on top of that, waves of terrorist attacks, military provocations, the use of weapons of various groups and tribes. It will overwhelm the internal bastion of order and also cover their neighbors as well. It'll spread like wildfire. And so to save and maintain internal stability, the most logical thing would be to redirect aggression and energy outwards. I repeat, what I'm explaining now, I explain in great details in my last book, Global Projects at War. And so if Arab countries and elites are allowed to make their own decisions without restrictions or limitations, then Israel will become the obligatory first victim. And so destroying several 100,000, even millions of young people passionate about the issue is an acceptable price for local elite if after this, as a result, the Jewish state ceases to exist. And after 2027, the old allies will no longer be able to support Israel because they're going to have enough trouble of their own and limit the appetites and plans of their neighbors. And so if at that time there's no consensus and support for the preservation of Israel, be it from Russia, from Iran, from Egypt, from the United States, there will be serious problems. And I have no doubts that a holy campaign will be declared against Israel, mainly to resolve the internal problems of the Arab countries themselves. And so the second potential target of such a campaign would be the Orthodox Ethiopia in the water wars. Because the relocation of tens of millions of people to the Nile River and several years of drought will be enough to make this a mandatory program. Now read my words and remember what I said. And so considering the explosive state of the Sahel region, there's a good chance that closer to 2030, we will see a war based on religious principles across the Dark Continent. Fortunately, there will be enough weapons and people willing to fight there. We're talking about 1 billion people. 1 billion people in Africa. And so needless to say, the number of victims will be in the tens of millions with mutual genocide and terror for the world to see. I don't think the world really cares all that much, but it's going to be there for all to see. And the third objective is obviously Europe, where sufficient conditions for survival will continue to exist, but the level, that's important, the level of protection will be frankly weak and weaker. And so the European Union will face the first wave along, okay, and has a good chance, not having other allies, of not surviving this. And after which the natural external constraints will be Russia, the Third Rome strategy, and partly Great Britain, the New Hansa strategy. We talked about this before, Europe dividing into three layers of society. The first Europe, that will be the rebirth of the Fourth Reich, Black International. The second Europe will be the Hansa League, okay, the Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Great Britain, unless they can find their own economic region, something that at present they don't have, especially after Brexit, okay? And so if you look at the additional markers, an additional stressor, let's say, between the 2027-2030 period will be the fall of the Gulf monarchies. When for example, with the Iranian support, the local Shiite population, which constitutes a majority in the provinces and also in oil and gas countries, proclaims Islamic/Shiite theocratic republics and invite the Iranians and the Iraqi Shiite troops seeking protection. And so if nothing is done and the situation is left to chance, the next period between 2030 and 2035, most of the Middle East will become one big Somalia. I repeat, if nothing is done, the next marker after the 2027-2030 period, the 2030-2035 period, most of the Middle East will become one big Somalia. What does that mean? It means a failed state with enclaves of relative security, bloody wars along the perimeters and inside, and more than 100 million refugees. We can't fathom these numbers. We can't fathom these numbers. What are you going to do with all these people? Where are they going to go? Are they going to go to other countries in the deep, dark Africa? I don't think so. They're going to go to Europe. How are you going to find place for 100 million hungry black refugees? And of course, it will not be possible to form a single state. This will take several decades or a miracle. And so the alternative is the consolidation and preservation of 5 to 7 regional states instead of the existing more than 24, if we're talking about the Sahel region. And so the principle is simple. As soon as events occur in a country and the old/new central government cannot stabilize the situation within a certain period of time, and we're seeing it right now in Syria, then the neighboring countries do not start talking support, but instead divide the territory between them and or transfer it to a single person. Relatively speaking, as an example, if Libya descends back into chaos, then Egypt will send in troops, annex it, and take responsibility for restoring order. And these changes are automatically recognized by other Middle Eastern countries. The same is going to happen with Ukraine once it loses the war. And the same is going to happen with all these countries in the Middle East, whether it's right now we're talking about Syria, whether we're talking in the future, God forbid, Iran. Needless to say, the collapse of Turkey as a nation state with some very, very serious internal economic problems. And so this principle should be, again, if we're looking, at a time frame, for this entire period between 2027 and 2035 period. So that in the end, several regional powers are formed, which will then be dismantled by pan-regions as potential junior partners/vassals. And so for external force, such a setup is also beneficial as it will deter aggression and refugee flows into their own territories. Because it's much easier with capable governments to agree to house refugees and centrally supply food and water to them in the countries themselves, rather than dealing with those who have fled across Europe. Because simply, again, it's not possible to house 100 million refugees from Africa. And yes, to avoid the emergence of a single Arab state, Egypt should not receive the reserves of the Persian Gulf, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, Mecca and Medina. In other words, Israel must stay and continue interfering with connectivity. At least that's the plan of the global elite. On that we end. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Daniel Estulin. Welcome to our internet-based show, World at Large. Join our channel, YouTube channel. Also subscribe to our subscription channel at estulin.media. Thanks again, and until tomorrow, goodbye.